All right, so I had the privilege of presenting and learning about DID, multiple personality disorder, and just a little bit of history slash background, I guess, is that these group of disorders, like the ones we learned about in class, specifically DID that I'm learning about right now, but dissociative amnesia and depersonalization, derealization, all of those are going to involve some sort of disassociation or separation of a part of the person's consciousness, memory, or identity. And in DID, dissociation is the main mechanism of coping with stress. And I'm sure that is true for all of the dissociative disorders, but I made a note that it is specifically the main mechanism in DID. But dissociative identity disorder was not always called this. Instead, this disorder has had various names over time. And has had lots of names that have been recorded very early in history. But so it's formally known as multiple personality disorder, which I'll kind of refer to them interchangeably as I talk about them. But sorry, this is going to happen a lot. But multiple personalities actually are a mode of survival in the face of child abuse or anyone that's experienced severe childhood trauma. And these multiple personalities alternate during really or very overwhelming or conflicting situations. And kind of a theoretical construct that may explain these alters of personality is that early or that abuse that happened early on. It kind of creates a state of rage for the child. And oftentimes that child is told that that state of rage is unacceptable and that they're not allowed to feel that. And so that repression of the rage kind of regulates in the area of the mind that that unconscious that we were talking about. This would be a place that's kind of outside of awareness for the child or, for the individual. And so as that repression kind of continues, the feelings build up, and that kind of creates the potential for, these explosions of feeling when the repression breaks down. And that kind of allows for the occurrence of these alternate personalities. So DID has a long history of experimental investigation. And as I was reading, I found that there seems to be kind of two points of view on this disorder. You have your skeptics and you have your advocates. And the skeptics are going to argue that DID is typically a phenomenon where these therapists or other influential people start to suggest dissociative symptoms to vulnerable individuals. And on the other hand, you have your advocates, which is typically what everybody's going to fall under. But you have your advocates who claim that DID, does emerge from these effects from severe childhood traumas or sexual abuse or things like that, or even individuals who have been predisposed to dissociative coping styles and kind of grew up learning those. But these advocates are obviously the more popular bunch. They are the ones that are going to be adding to the diagnostic criteria that we have for DID and the increase in cases that we have of DID and different things like that. And they help us increase awareness and all that stuff. But with these two kind of points of view, there comes two theories. So theory one will fall under the skeptical view, and then theory two will be kind of that advocacy view. So theory one states iridogenic factors contribute to the development of multiple personality disorder and that it's largely culture bound. And then you have theory two that it is post-traumatic disorder of the dissociative type. For example, childhood physical, emotional, and sexual abuse or trauma. So yeah, again, just kind of to reiterate those two types of points of view. Then we have our diagnosis. So diagnosis is obviously going to be done through a certified mental health professional who has knowledge and experience in both assessing and treating of PTSD, all dissociative disorders, and personality disorders. And this is kind of important because multiple personality disorder is very difficult and kind of complex in its multiplicity of the amount of symptoms that it can have. It's difficult to differentiate at times, so it's very important that mental health professionals are the ones diagnosing, abiding by the DSM-5 and things like that, and that they're aware of the effects of other disorders that could play a role in DID. So these mental health professionals are definitely going to be used to that reluctancy of patients to discuss their symptoms or their multiple personalities. So the DSM-5 has certain criteria that has to be met in order for this disorder to be diagnosed. And we learned about this in class, but again, the identity has to be disrupted by 2 or more distinct personality states or by the experience of possession, either self-reported or observed, and I kind of talk about that in the next slide. But there also has to be an altered behavior, mood, sense of self, memories, emotions, cognitions, and perceptions. Also frequent gaps in memory of everyday events or inability to recall important personal information. And that's that dissociative, like that amnesia part of symptoms that these individuals may be experiencing. So these patients are going to exhibit, like I just said, unique levels of dissociation and definitely have a distinct set of these dissociative symptoms. And this is just kind of some extra information, but I was reading that through interviews and self-report, researchers have begun to recognize some of the shared features in DID patients, such as episodes of partial or total amnesia, which would be a criteria of DSM-5, history of childhood trauma, which is kind of that one that we've been talking about, non-psychotic hearing of voices, subject sense of being controlled by a foreign entity, and alterations in identity, such as diary entries in in different handwritings, which again would kind of be this first identity disrupted by 2 or more distinct personality states. When treating patients with MPD, DID, I think it's very important to understand that these patients have experienced some sort of abuse or traumatic event in their life that has, compromised their development of their personality in some form. And, this abuse or this traumatic event has directly affected them. And so I definitely think the goal of treatment for these individuals should be to treat them as a whole adult person, or, whatever stage of life that they're being treated in. But, some of these individuals may have alternate personalities that are children, but still overall treating them as an adult person and holding their patients accountable for the behavior of all of their identities is definitely important to discuss before we talk about the different techniques of treatment. But these are the major techniques that I saw discussed. Some of them, we'll see as treatment for other disorders, psychoanalysis, cognitive therapy, group therapy. I definitely think all of these are beneficial in their own way. And I would like to see how all of them would play out. That would be cool. But yeah, these are just some of them. And then I have additional techniques that are used in treatment as well. This is 20 different ones. But obviously you have your medications. You have hypnosis. Some of these I hadn't heard before, but I think the writing exercises is always interesting because you can see the different handwriting of the different personalities and things like that. So I definitely find these treatment techniques very creative and very interesting in the way that they're conducted. I wanted to throw this in there. I thought this was fun too, that OTs can actually treat MPD. And I didn't really know that. I didn't know that kind of happened, but I mean, it makes sense as I read about it. But I found this really cool article that talked about, OT's role in helping identify specific tasks that inhibit stress in the nervous system. And this is important because there we see patients that experience stressful events, and these stressful events produce anger, and maybe that anger hasn't been acknowledged, but it's probably not acknowledged because it's been connected with an overwhelming anger of a past trauma, which seeing that in DID patients and getting them involved in productive activities can actually aid in the release of that anger, which I found to be really, really interesting. I also found it interesting that sensory motor based activities can actually help patients with NPD, and it helps them maintain kind of a healthy lifestyle and restore a healthy balance between their work and self-care and leisure and things like that. Which that was just a fun little snippet, but I thought that was a cool way to treat NPD. So juvenile outcomes of this case are actually more favorable, which I found interesting. Rather than cases that are not juvenile, they're more likely to not be as promising. But overall, I mean, the prognosis of this disorder is going to be dependent on the individual's response to therapy and how they choose to respond to therapy, and the amount of effort that they put into it. But due to social and occupational impairment, those who have a personality disorder are typically slower to recover, more likely to relapse, and have a greater chronicity for a wider range of other mental disorders, which does not necessarily surprise me. So the biblical perspective, this one was interesting. Saw a lot about demon possession. Truly, I don't have my own biblical perspective yet. I definitely lean with the mental health professions or professionals kind of hardly ever accepting that it is demon possession. I do believe in demon possession. However, I'm not quite sure if I would associate DID and PD with demon possession. I read that Protestants and conservative Roman Catholics tend to believe this just because of what they tend to believe about the Bible. But also I found it interesting that some conservative Christians do believe that this would be the case, or that demon possession can be a result or can sometimes cause schizophrenia and depression and mental instabilities and suicide and things like that. That didn't necessarily surprise me. But yeah, so I wish I had a little bit more about the biblical perspective, but truly I'm just not quite sure what I believe yet. And I do believe in demon possession. I do believe that is real, and that you can be delivered from those. But anyways, I enjoyed a lot reading and learning about this disorder more in depth, but here are my references, and yeah.